The competitive 40K network presents Art of War. Art of War. Strategy and tactics. Discussions with the best players on the planet. Now your host, Nick Nanavati.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Art of War podcast. I'm your host, Nick Nanavati, and this week we have a really special guest, good friend of mine from the Midwest, Ben Cherwein. Ben, how are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic, Nick. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for coming on the show, Ben. For those of you who don't know, Ben is a hallmark staple of the competitive 40K scene, especially in the Midwest. He has been on the top tables of GT since I was basically in diapers, and he is a pillar of the community. I'm really excited to have him on. He's been innovating a lot of Chaos Space Marine armies, and we just got the brand new Chaos Space Marine Codex, and holy crap, Ben has already figured out so much to do with it. Ben just came off of an awesome run at the Dreamhack Invitational Exhibition Team Tournament. We had a guest on last week, Walter Langendorf, talking about it. But we're going to hear from his perspective on the United Midwest Project, a whole other team, and to see how he did with those Chaos Space Marines. Does that sound good, Ben?
It sounds fantastic.
Awesome. Listeners, this is, of course, part one of a two-part show. You can subscribe to our Patreon, AOW40k.com. That will allow you access to part two of this episode, along with 240 other episodes of the show, and our amazing Discord server, where you can access all of our content and interact with our very own coaches. So don't miss out. Get on patreon.com/AOW40k. Help support the show. And now, without further ado, Ben, I got a few questions for you.
I'm ready. Bring it on.
How did you get into Warhammer?
So it started off as Magic and Pokemon cards back in the day, and I was at a shop with the miniatures, and I saw them. They looked cool. I started off with fantasy, and then I prefer sci-fi. Kind of shifted into that, and then I'm super competitive by nature. Everybody around me knows that. I'm seeing who can eat their food the fastest, who can, get to the car the fastest, whatever it is, I'm competing for it. Yeah. So Warhammer really was a draw to me because of the strategy behind it. I did a lot of chess back in the day as well. So that kind of led me to that, where cards is more, I don't want to say it's all luck, but a lot of the games that are lost are like, oh man, if I just drew this card, this happens in Warhammer too. But I feel more in control with Warhammer, so I can only blame myself on the losses. So then, I started picking up armies and playing from there. Obviously, when you first start out, you actually don't know what you're doing, so it's really, not the same game it is now. But then from there, the competitive scene kind of took off as I was playing it, so it just scratched that itch at the same time. So that's basically, opened the door for me. And when you're competitive in life, you pick a couple of things and then you just do what you're really good at. Because if you try to do stuff like, I tried skateboarding for a while. Now, I'm going to be honest, I was not great. But Warhammer, I'm pretty good at, so I stuck with that. So that's basically how I walked in. It's basically game store. The frontline game stores are really how it got me cultured into Warhammer.
Wow, that's really amazing. Just kind of old school style with that. That makes a lot of sense. So how old were you when you started playing it?
15 or 16, right at the tail end of second edition. So I've been playing it for quite some time because I'm an old fart now.
Yeah, no worries. So that's super exciting. And through that time, you've played a lot of different factions, Ben. I don't really know what you would say is your main faction. What do you think it is?
Nick, come on, bud. It's Black Templars.
It's Black Templars. I knew the answer. You've been playing a lot of CSM lately, so I got excited. I was hoping you'd switch to the dark side.
Well, so it's interesting, though, because even though I'm a Templar fan through and through, you got to mix it up. Right. And you got to keep yourself fresh in the game, because if you don't do that yourself, at least for me, the game becomes very mechanical. And I think once you become mechanical, you can become predictable. So I like to keep myself fresh on my toes. And the CSM have different detachments that kind of like lit up my sensories. Like, oh, this is fun,
Yeah, definitely. So what is it, I guess, that you would call your play style with the game? With so much experience and knowledge playing Warhammer, I'm sure you've tried all kinds of different styles over the years, but what would you describe as your play style?
I've been called aggro KG, and for those of you who don't know what KG means, it's you're still very conservative. You're waiting for the board state to unfold, but I still have that aggressive style. Well, I'm still willing to throw away units, even if I'm playing Eldar, to achieve my essentially my tactical plan.
Yeah. So basically, kind of reactive, defensive from that Eldar background, but you like having that aggressive nature to really punish someone when they kind of walk into your trap or whatever.
Correct. That would be the perfect way to describe it, I believe.
Nice. So, what is it that's drawn you to this Chaos Space Marine Codex, and especially with respect to how deep it is? It's got 8 detachments, so many different data sheets, all kinds of different variety of builds. You've gone for like a Renegade style army here. Why that direction?
Well, the first thing that I look at when I'm dissecting the Chaos Space Marine Codex is, you always look at Black Legion first, kind of like Space Marines. You look at the Ultramarines ones first. Now that they're not labeled that, this would be the veterans of the Long War. Because that's where essentially the mainstay of the game is, right? You always see Ultramarines, you always see Black Legion, because sometimes the writing for that translates into the rule set. But as I read through the Codex and was deciphering what I wanted to do, a couple of things about Raiders caught my eye. And those of you who know who have been playing competitively with Templars, the Firestorm, so the advance and shoot, which means you can advance in action, really caught my eye. So that's kind of where it all started, looking at the Renegades.
Nice. And that's definitely a style of Chaos Space Marines, which gives you that speed and ability to react to your opponent. However, it's also kind of depending on your opponent's ability to fall into your plays, because a lot of your rules are tied to whether or not your opponent is just standing on objectives, right? You get +1 AP if your opponent's on objectives. You get access to reroll hits and wounds if you're shooting a unit on objectives. Is that something that you found limiting or out of your control at all?
I found it quite the opposite. I found it kind of like a noose around my opponent's neck, like, go ahead, hold that objective, I dare you. So
yeah, I mean, that's definitely another way to look at it. For sure.
But yes, it did add a little bit of predictability to it at the same time. But with the game so primary focused, it really wasn't. It didn't come up that often. But this last weekend, being the caliber that it was, it definitely came up more than it would at a normal GT, I will say.
Yeah, fair enough. So let's not put the cart before the horse here. Can you just go through your army list for the Dreamhack event, kind of top to bottom?
Yeah, absolutely. So for the characters, I've got 2 Chaos Lords. I have 2 enhancements. First one is the Dread Reaver, which is full rerolls to hit and wound on the character specifically. And he has to be wholly within 12 inches of your opponent's deployment zone. And then I have the Tyrant's Lash, which gives you a reroll on your advance roll, and then they can fall back and shoot the unit that they're with. But for what I'm using that for, that second part didn't mean anything. For Battle Line, I've got 2 Cultist Mobs. I really like their ability to sticky objective, and this synergizes with the list pretty well because of such a forward-pushing list. Sticking an objective means that I can still push even the cultist squads up if I want to and still hold my home objective. I've got a Chaos Rhino, which will hold the Chosen and Chaos Lords, which Chosen are later in the list, but we'll get there. I've got a squad of Chaos Bikers with 2 Melted Guns and Power Fists. These guys are incredibly efficient for their point cost. They come with a bunch of special weapons. They're fast. They can advance and shoot. With the Dark Pact, they're actually a decent amount of shooting. And if you're on an objective, they get AP, which is something they sorely lack. And then I've got these were actually my favorite unit that I used all weekend, which would have been the Chaos Predator Destructor. They just come with a lot of weapons. And they're very anti-infantry because their ability is an additional AP when you're shooting infantry. Pair that with the Renegades, you're suddenly looking at that autocan being a set of AP1, which is almost negligible in this edition, to AP3 into infantry, and that becomes a big deal.
Yeah, that's a huge efficiency boost there.
Huge efficiency boost, and it's range at 48 and 6 shots at 24. With the current boards the way they are on WTC layouts, we were playing on NTL layouts. There aren't a ton of maps with huge firing lanes, so I'm pretty much going to be in that 24 inch range. So that was a big consideration for the Dreads. And then they have the last cannons, which are sorely needed. Chaos Space Marines, one of the things I noticed is that their anti-tank was lacking without being on some sort of expensive chassis. But they hear that you can take the 2 last cannons on a 130-point chassis and split fire them off into something else. They're still really great, and then them getting boosted to AP4 is a huge deal because then most transports like Rhinos and such uncover on a 6-up, and a 6-up to a 5-up, there's a huge spike there in probability, which I really like. And then
makes a lot of sense.
Yep, I had 2 Chaos Vindicators. There's my grasp at some anti-tank, using these guys mostly to go bumper car something and sit there with a 2-up save being T11. T11 and the 2-up is actually a pretty good breaking point. There's lots of strength 10 out in the game. Blood Angels are strength 10. The 2-up save in having the 1 CP AOC, these guys turned out to be pretty tough. And they're OC3, which isn't horrible. But I will say I missed a good key point on the Predator Destructor. They're OC4 base versus the Marine variant OC3, and that was a big consideration as well. I've got 2 Chosen Squads to go with my Chaos Lords. These are essentially shuttles to give my Chaos Lords advance and charge. They do a little bit of damage. They're okay at clearing hordes, but mostly just like the old Pack-Bound Zealots, or I think it was the Index CSM. They're just basically there to get the Chaos Lord advance and charge so that he can pop his once per game and do tons of damage. And then the big part of the list is I've got 2 sets of 10 Warp Talons and a set of 5. And Warp Talon's ability to go uppy, downy, it just screams, yes, please, to me. Plus, Renegades have a stratagem for 1 CP to advance and charge infantry. Anytime a jump pack infantry can advance and charge that hit as hard as Warp Talons do, hook it into my veins, right?
Warp Talons are just absolutely out of this world. Like, we're going to cover them in detail, but like, holy crap, Warp Talons.
Yeah. So the whole overarching synergy that I built for the list here is that I've got the Warp Talons, which can advance and charge. They could rapid ingress. They could do all this stuff. But they force my opponent to play back, and then that allows my vehicles that have long-range shooting to get angles. And that way I can kind of force damage on 2 fronts rather than just, like World Leaders are mostly 1 front, being the melee base, And then the Warp Talons make it extremely hard for screens because I can wait a turn to do damage. Right, so the Warp Talons can clear screens and all that stuff. I just like how this list just came to fruition. I like it a lot. It was a lot of fun to play.
It looks like a really nice, compact, well-rounded army. One of the things that I found, I also play CSM, probably not as often as you do, Ben, but I feel like the Renegades attachment is very much Chaos-based Marine good stuff. It's not pushing you in a specific direction aside from just like you get assault, you get better AP, you want that on the good units. Where do you find synergies in direction with the data sheets you're taking with respect to the detachment that you're putting them in?
So for this one, the only thing that doesn't really come to mind, like the Warp Talon's not having a gun to advance in action is the only bummer. But so I'm looking at, what are some of the struggles with these data sheets that this could sew up? And one of the big things is the Vindicator gets his movement cut to 9 for being a heavier tank. Well, with having an assault, the Vindicator can get angles and having a 24-inch range that would normally a normal list would not be able to do. Granted, it's still by chance with the D6 advance, but at the same time, your opponent has to account for that. They can't count on you rolling once, right? So, and same with the Predators. Getting angles with them it's like a lot easier with the assault. And then having the extra AP means that I can put pressure on the primary of the objectives, and having Warp Talons in your face and everything like that means that, they have to either back off or give me units. And then if they give me units, I get strategic positioning with the uppy downy, as I like to call it.
So let's kind of break down the Warp Talons in detail here. How exactly does their rule work, and how are you using them on the table?
So their rule works. It's kind of like a little bit weird to go into, but in layman's terms, if they charge and swing, or even if they just charge, period, they will be eligible to fight in the fight phase. So if they were eligible to fight in the fight phase, at the end of the fight phase, they can be placed into strategic reserve. So that can get complicated on your opponent's turn, but on your turn, it's very simple. It's either you made a charge or you were in an existing combat and you are no longer engaged, you can leave. A couple different ways that this has come about. So an example, I charge something, I kill it, I can leave. If I don't kill it, Renegades do have a stratagem that I can do to still fall back and leave, but that's only on my turn because I choose the order of the abilities your opponent could choose on their turn. The other way is if I'm in an existing combat and somebody swings on me first because your opponent picks first, I pull casualties and they don't pile into me. As long as I fought earlier in that combat, I can still leave. So there are nuances to it, but ultimately you want to fight and kill something and leave. That's just the
basic line play, right? Yeah. Charge the Warp Talons in, slaughter whatever, chaff, good thing, whatever, and go into reserves. And then because you're in reserves going into your opponent's turn, you can immediately rapid ingress, and I like to call it the Warp Talon loop that you just put yourself into.
Correct. And the reason, this is a big reason, a lot of the other person who showed up with CSM took 30 Warp Talons. I found that I could not do the Warp Talon loop with 30, and that some of them were hanging out. And when they're just hanging out, they're just Marine bodies that can be shot.
Yeah, exactly. So almost like there was a diminishing return on the Warp Talons.
Right. Correct.
With that said, you still ran 25. Those are not rookie numbers.
No. So the reason I ran 25 is because I wanted one to start in reserve always, a big 10 man that I could rapid ingress without having to loop. And then the other one was to first turn threaten, advance and charge. If I catch a screen out or an infiltrator or whatever, then they can go into reserve anyway. And it doesn't really hurt me. It just allows me to clear some space out. And then the 5-man was to clear even smaller chaff. But most of the time they came down and did signals, or they deployed teleport homers, just because they have that deep strike ability innately. Doing those actions is crucial when you can get screened out on the strategic reserve, just on the 6-inch bars on the sides. So I wanted that. And then at the same time, though, instead of people would say, well, why not Raptors? Well, Raptors are not nearly as killy as the Warp Talons. So the Warp Talons can still Warp Talon loop at 5-man.
Definitely. So I assume this Warp Talon, 550 points of Warp Talons is a substantial part of your army, and their play within your army was a key component to your strategy?
Oh, 100%. Whether it was forcing positioning by my opponent, rapid ingressing to get a charge that normally would not be possible, they were just vital for the list, 100%.
So let's talk about how you actually deployed and played this army on the table, because I totally get the Warp Talon loop. Thanks for explaining that. And then beyond that, it's just advancing and shooting data sheets and some chosen and rhinos. Vindicators are tanks, they move and shoot and whatever. Predators are tanks, they move, shoot, whatever. And then chosen get out of rhinos and attempt to charge stuff. So is this you're trying to stage up turn 1, just hammer your opponent into the ground turn 2? Is this a perpetual elongated game? Where are you looking to put your units?
I would say that I designed this to hammer turn 2. Just because of the positioning that is involved with turn 1. If somebody gives me angles, if I'm going first with my vehicles, they're going to be in pain, but they'll do that to anybody, right? So I don't plan for them to do that. So what I do plan for is making sure that I'm setting up the appropriate, screens, and that's not necessarily screening my opponent out for deep striking, but having their units be where I want my Warp Talons to be next turn. I might shove a Vindicator into that rune. So next turn, or on the wherever, they're just going to stay away from that. But so the ultimate strategy, we to get the Warp Talons, but then I like to have, I think I've heard you guys call it the 3-point objective holding, where I've got something in a rhino, I've got a vehicle, and then I've got infantry. So that the objectives are really hard to take for me, so that the Chaos Predator and the rhino can do that, or the bikers and the Predator, etc. So I can score my early game primary, because the list is built to score late game. So I needed to be able to score early game as well, but without putting myself at high risk, because I can't just stick cultists out there. Anybody can kill 10 cultists. And if you can't, you're not playing 40K.
So you're actually leaning into the durability of that Vindicator, Predator, Rhino, that type of stuff, and then putting a Rhino full of Chosen and a Vindicator on an objective. And that 3-point method you mentioned is basically, it takes one gun to kill the Vindicator on a great day, a really powerful gun. And then something can kill a Rhino. That's not too difficult. And then dudes get out of the Rhino, and that takes a third unit altogether. And that's now your opponent has brought their entire army to bear to attempt to shoot you off an objective. And that's not really the most feasible thing. So you're kind of holding primary through just army on objective style.
Yeah, attrition, essentially. I'm waiting for the Warp Talons to do their thing.
Nice. And then there are some targets that the Warp Talons don't necessarily just like slaughter, right? Like if you fight a Land Raider, if 10 Warp Talons are not killing a Land Raider, are you using the pairings process that is inherent to the team format to avoid those matchups, or do you have like some sort of plan for them as well?
No, 100%. 100%
Okay.
using the pairings.
We got bad matchups and we're calling them what they are. Okay.
Yep, exactly. You know, if I told you, like one of the things the United Women's Project brought was 3 Land Raiders and Dread Knights, I don't want anything to do with that with this list because I don't think I could kill 2 Land Raiders, let alone 3. I think I can handle
I felt
1.
the same way. I had like a big no on my pairings matrix for that one.
So yeah, that was definitely a consideration. I think, but like I said, CSM, that's one of the things I think that the Renegades are missing in some sort of anti-tank that's consistent comparatively. Coming from Space Marines, right? You know, you've got Inceptors, which are twin linked. You've got all these different other anti-tank tools, Lancers with built-in rerolls. You know, the Defilers are cool and all, but you know, it's not nearly as versatile.
You ever try moving one?
What's that? A Defiler? That's what I'm saying.
Like you're never moving that thing around the board, you know?
Right. They gave it a rule so it could climb over 4-inch rules because they knew that.
Yeah, that's true. So yeah, I hear you with your lack of anti-tank kind of being a real facet with Chaos Space Marines, right? Especially coming from regular Space Marines. You have Inceptors, you have Lancers, those kind of stuff. If you kind of got by with your anti-tank, right? 2 Vindicators and a couple Predator Destructors with las cannons. I would say that's like a token amount of anti-tank to kill like some stuff. How did you find those data sheets? Were they like enough anti-tank?
So my theory behind them, and I was correct, is that I just wanted to bring enough anti-tank where they couldn't sit in a Rhino and prevent me from cracking them with Warp Talons. So I just wanted enough shooting to kill Rhinos, Sagittars, whatever it might be, some dedicated transport with stuff that Warp Talons wants to charge inside. So the Predators did do that enough. I would say that the Chosen did more of that though, so that might be something to consider.
How are you allocating what your units should attack? Like, were your Vindicators like purely on anti-tank duty, whereas Chosen were like fighting infantry screens? Were Chosen with the Lord pumped up to anti-tank duty? How did you figure out what to attack with what here?
So it depended on the toughness value of it. The Land Raider variants, T12 stuff, I used to definitely use the Lords to crack that. The lighter tanks, I was most likely be able to get a Predator into them because the Predator's a pretty good profile into them with the Strength 9 and the last cannons. But then for like screens, I know it's going to shock you, but that's what my Vindicators were there for, to charge and hold up screens.
No, your Vindicators are screening over here?
Yep, I know it sounds messed up, but so just a little thought process of what went into my list is the Vindicators were originally a Disco Lord because the Disco Lord synergizes a lot with the Renegade Raiders stratagems.
Right. They're mounted units, and Renegade Raiders is all about mounted units.
Correct, and they have a 2-up save, a 5-up involved, and they can AOC. And so I liked that quite a bit because they were a little bit tough. You know, they had an involved and they had some melee, but I just found them a little bit lackluster with having only 6-inch range guns, and then the Bale Flamer is just 1 gun. And then their melee wasn't quite enough to kill most things. Like a 5-man Marine squad would probably live. And, you got a 190-point unit that can't kill 5 Marines in combat when you're a close combat machine. That's a little bit of an issue.
Yeah, kind of an identity crisis there.
Yeah, right. So I like the Disco Lord because it could hold an objective and have a 2-up save and fight off, infantry or screens or whatever. And then I looked at the Vindicator. It's cheaper, and it can still shoot into combat and with no penalty with its blast. And it could be anti-tank. And I was like, why am I not just taking this and going and playing bumper cars with it?
I can't believe you're saying the Vindicator could be anti-tank, as if that's not the primary reason to take this thing. That's so fascinating. I assumed your answer was going to be Vindicators shoot tanks. What else is there?
It did end up that way, Nick. I'm not going to lie, but but the original thought process was that Disco Lord off on its own, dealing with screens, and the Vindicator just came up a better option because it did give me that anti-tank. So you are correct. Eventually, I came full circle, but the initial reaction was not that, which is I thought was an interesting piece.
So it's interesting also coming into it with such specific data sheets, right? Like Vindicators basically do 0 damage outside of their big cannon, and Warp Talons only do damage when they charge something in the combat phase, pretty much. And same with Chosen, and like your Predators only shoot something. A lot of times in Space Marines, people think of them as a very combined arms force where your units can shoot and fight. Like your basic dudes can just do that. And you've largely foregone that for these specialized stylistic units that are very good at the thing that they are trying to do. And hopefully if you take enough different things that are all good at different things, you have a cohesive army. Did you ever find that your opponent could like target one section of your army? Like, I'm going to kill the 2 Predators out of here, I'm going to kill the 2 Vindicators, the Warp Talons, and then your army didn't have the tools to deal with them? Or were you able to navigate around that?
I would say I was able to navigate around that for the most part. I'd say the hardest part about this is the lack of invulns, because if they hit high AP, that's where I felt it the most. So if they had a decent amount of that elite infantry killing / damage 3 or AP 4, I felt it pretty bad because I have no invulns anywhere except for my Chaos Lords.
Warp Talons all have 5-ups, don't they?
Yeah, but most of the stuff that goes into them is AP2 anyway. It's not really higher than AP2. And if it is, I'm looking out. But
it's like the AP4 melt the shot into the Predator just goes through and it hurts really bad.
Hurt real bad. Yep.
Yeah. As sisters, I look at these tanks and I'm like, delicious.
Yeah. I don't know if sisters are like, that's not a matchup that I put green for, just so you know.
Yeah, there you go. So let's talk about the team format a little bit here, right? Because this was, like we talked about, the first ever Dreamhack exhibition for Warhammer. There were 4 teams invited, 32 people, and we were basically there to exhibition 40K for like thousands of esports fans and people who are in those esports circles in an attempt to try to hopefully help Warhammer become more of an esport and accepted in those circles. What was your take on all that?
I mean, it was great exposure. We had a thing where if somebody came up to the table, you could talk to them. Time was less of an issue here. That was fantastic. Getting to show off something that has been a passion for most of my life to, a crowd. Because if you didn't know, Nick, I did play some esports back in the day. I was part of Cal-I.
I had no idea.
Counter-Strike. So I've been in the scene before. And we used to compete down in Texas once a year at Cyber Professional League, CPL. Wow. And to see these guys come and check out Warhammer and having the cusp of being an esport, it's so cool to see, because I never thought it would happen.
Yeah, it's something we've like hinted at, talked about. Wouldn't it be nice if for like years and years and years, and to see if it's like finally taking some steps to do that is so cool.
Yeah, it was incredible to interact with these people. They're like, oh my God, what is this? And, you get to tell them about it. And they're like, that is really cool. And, to me, that's just like, yeah, come join us. Come to the dark side. We have models.
Exactly. It's 3-dimensional. Unbelievable.
Yeah, exactly.
Human interaction.
Right. So that was really cool, honestly.
Did you feel as though, this was your first time playing with United Midwest Project, did you feel as though you were part of that team and kind of assimilated very nicely? Was there any challenge with being a newcomer to a established team?
No more than any other normal team. I mean, the pairing process went very smoothly. I interjected my opinion a couple of times, but mostly they took care of the pairings because they they were very meticulous with the matrix, because that's for team events, as you know, Nick, matrix is pretty important. There were no real, it was pretty cohesive. We had lots of practices beforehand. It was an enjoyable experience that I would definitely do again.
That's awesome.
For sure. So yeah. Everybody was very, nobody was hard on anybody if they took a loss, because how can you? Right.
I think also that event in particular, and not only teams treat your team nicely, but that environment was all Shark Tank all day long. I lost round 118 too. Since when does that happen?
Right. Exactly. And I think, they were possibly a little hard on themselves. I'm like, don't be. We're doing fine. I'm having a blast, and we're getting 3 games that would take probably years of competing to get all 3 of these games in, to get these specific team matchups, essentially. Well, probably more now, because as you guys have seen, teams is taking off in the U.S. meta, which is great to see. But previously, it would take years to get that amount of games against that many good teams in, essentially.
Well, that's something that I'm just so excited for. I've been hopefully helping spearhead, just more teams in Warhammer, more team events. Like, it's such a fun way to embrace the hobby, especially if you're friends. So for listeners who have heard us gush on about teams forever, it's not stopping. More teams more often.
And it should, right? Because the teams is a different way to play. I won't say singles should take a backseat to teams, because that would. I like to defend my singles honor, but
yeah, I think singles certainly has a place, right? Like, it's how a lot of people enjoy Warhammer, myself included.
Right, and I think they're symbiotic, right? Because you need singles for the extra data for teams. Otherwise, teams data isn't complete, because you need to know what like, as a good example, how is Yukari into Grey Knights? If you never pair that in teams and there is no singles, you never know that Grey Knights are horrible for Yukari. You can look at it on a piece of paper and say, okay, this might not be so great, but then to actually play it and see how bad that pairing is, that's just an example. I don't think I've seen that. Without singles, I don't know if we have that data. We probably might, but I'm just saying singles helps teams, and teams definitely help singles, in my opinion.
Yeah, completely agree. It's a symbiotic thing. I mean, they're two different things ultimately, and just want two different formats of enjoying Warhammer. Lots of games have multiple formats.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's bring it back to your army list and playing it on the table and stuff. Would you change this army much for singles play versus teams play? I know you are most avidly a singles player, maybe stepping into teams more now, but obviously that's got to be on your mind.
Yeah, it is. And there definitely is some stuff. I probably am taking out the Vindicators and trying to find some other way to kill some tanks.
Let me ask you, Ben, because I have smoked from the Vindicator snuff, and it's not doing it for me. I don't know. I've tried 3-4 games with the Vindicators, and I just roll these casino cannons, and nothing happens most of the time. Every now and then I kill Demon Russ, and I'm like, ooh. But if I was to count it, like 4 out of 5 shots with the Vindicator, nothing effective happens, and I just can't live like that.
I literally am sitting next to dice that I have rolled the Vindicator over and over again. And every time, 2 of them most likely don't kill something that I want dead. They might kill a Rhino, but then I roll the Predator versus the Rhino, and the Predator kills it before the Vindicator does. So
something about random shots, no rerolls, just doesn't get it done. Even
with sustained or lethals, which you would never, I don't think statistically lethals is better than a strength 14 weapon getting an extra hit, but there might be a world out there where there's something tough as 14 eventually. But yeah, I just so disappointed in their damage output. Their ability to stick on a point is really awesome, but again, that takes command points, and sometimes I just don't have it or want to spend it on a Vindicator.
Well, as one chaos enthusiast to another, I'm kind of shocked to not see Legionnaires in Rhinos or Venom Crawlers. Like, these are just amazing value data sheets I've found through all my testing. What was the choice there?
So I did like Legionnaires. I opted for Chosen to keep up with the speed of the Warp Talons with the Chaos Lords to kind of do like an all pressure kind of thing. If I were to go back, I probably would have some Legionnaires, probably 2 squads. And honestly, I'd probably take down my Cultist by 1 and switch that to Legionnaires as well. Probably do 2 Rhinos. So I think what I'm saying is, I think you're right, Nick. The only thing that I would probably not take is the Venom Crawlers. And that's just because I feel like the Warp Talons can probably kill what the Venom Crawlers kill. And I'm just essentially taking Warp Talon bait. But to be fair, I have not played enough games with Venom Crawlers to say that. So maybe I'll take some, put them on the table and see how I like them. I do like that they add attacks to themselves.
I definitely recommend giving the Venom Crawlers a try. They have been an all-star data sheet for me, kind of in conjunction with Warp Talons. I will say, though, in the interest of playing both sides here, having too much Venom Crawler, Legionnaire, Warp Talon is definitely a trap I've fallen into, because they are all such amazing data sheets for their points cost, and none of them actually hit that hard. So all of a sudden you have a really amazing skirmish army that can't kill anything tougher than a Rhino. And I know since you are looking to drop your Vindicators, maybe that is a problem, or maybe that's some way you can build your army to succeed at the mission or something in lieu of killing those harder targets?
Well, I was looking at a Land Raider because I think the Land Raider has some potential there with some Legionnaires, because then I don't necessarily need advanced charge. But that's something that I just tossed around in my mind. I'd like AP4 last cannons.
I do love a Land Raider. I think a Land Raider in CSM is quite good.
Yeah, me too. I think that was a miss on my part with that. So that's ultimately where I was leading with my changing, is that the 2 Vindicators are probably going to become a Land Raider.
So there's a lot of different detachments you could explore with this codex. Are you pretty married to Renegades, or you think you're going to keep exploring?
Oh, I've been exploring. I'm an Emperor's Children player as well. I have all my Emperor's Children are, as you know, like Horse Heresy. So I got like the Fulgrim as my Demon Prince and all that. So I've been messing around with them as well. But for the main CSM book, I want to find a way to make Abaddon work, because I think with his new leaders, that he can lead multiple things like Chosen. I think that there's something there, but I just don't know yet. I have to play around with it more. To be fair, I didn't have a ton of time before Dreamhack to really dig apart this codex. I had some time, but not enough to go through 8 detachments and find all what I want.
That was actually part of the reason I think Team America did not bring the Chaos Space Marines. Was just like there was no time between their release and Dreamhack's list submission to really dig your teeth into the codex and come up with something you like. Did you get a lot of games in beforehand, or not that many and just kind of wung it?
I think I got like 17 games in before I locked lists, so a decent chunk.
That's pretty solid. 17 is a lot by most people's standards.
Yeah. I mean, I do play a lot of Warhammer. I'm kind of an addict.
I mean, you get on this show for a reason, Ben. So that's awesome, though. And I'm really excited to talk about more about in part 2 your matchups. I know Art of War and United Midwest Project got a chance to play. I'm very curious about that round along with your others, because you played against 3 amazing teams: Pro Tabletop, Team America, and then Art of War. And of course, your army had threw a lot of wrenches into the pairings for people, I'm sure. And I'm curious to kind of go into detail of all of that and the story of the event. That's going to be in part 2 for our patrons, again, at patreon.com/AOW40K. But before I let you go, Ben, onto that podcast, I got one more question for you.
I have an answer for you.
If you could give one piece of advice for any aspiring Warhammer player, what would it be?
That it's a game still. There's no reason that there needs to be an argument over millimeters.
That's a great piece of advice, right?
Yeah.
I think we can all take a lesson from that and just kind of take a step back. This game is not life, and just play to have fun.
Right. That would be my biggest piece of advice, because I can't tell you how many bad games I've had. I'm just being like, what are you doing here, man? Like, I'm just here I'm rolling dice. I'm having fun. I know I'm competitive, but there's no reason for this. But anyway, I digress.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's very fair and valid, and definitely in part of the ethos of what Art of War tries to instill in all of our listeners is, we play to win. We play to push ourselves and grow and learn and become more than we were before, and, get better at the game. But ultimately, it is a game with your opponent, and these are people that have a lot more going on than just the 3 hours of Warhammer you play together. And make sure everyone, including yourself, is having a good time and not taking it too seriously.
Yes, that's a good summary.
Awesome, Ben. Well, thanks so much for coming onto the show. We had a blast talking about Chaos Space Marines. You've been a pleasure to speak with, and I'm really excited to hear more about your Chaos adventures in part 2.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Nick, very much. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. Listeners, keep on listening. Check over to patreon.com/AOW40K to subscribe for part 2 along with our amazing Discord server, and we will see you later.
Like what you just listened to? Check out Art of War Down Under and Art of War Unbroken on the competitive 40K network. TheArtofWar40K.com.